The nurse rolled her eyes the moment he walked in. He was late, again. Drenched from the rain, hoodie clinging to his back, jaw clenched like the world owed him something. And when he didn't speak right away, just stood there at the counter, eyes scanning for someone in charge. She leaned over and whispered to her colleague, "Here we go." To her, he was one of those fathers. Defensive, loud, difficult. She didn't know his name, didn't care to. But she'd remember it soon, because 3 weeks later, when her son's heart started failing, it would be his daughter's heart keeping the boy alive. And by then, the nurse would realize it wasn't his attitude that was the problem. It was her silence. The hospital was loud that night. Monitors beeped like anxious metronomes. PA announcements sliced the air in sterile monotone. Somewhere down the corridor, a child was crying. Not a tantrum, but that sharp, wet sound of pain that only a parent could interpret instantly. Darius stood at the front desk, soaked to the bone. He didn't say much, didn't need to. His presence carried the weight of urgency. In his arms, wrapped in a pink quilt that didn't quite hide the blood, was his daughter. "Car accident," he said, voice low, hoarse. "She's not responding." The nurse at the desk, Linda, snapped into routine. "Trauma intake, Bay 3. Now." But as Darius moved past, she muttered just loud enough for her colleague to hear, "Can't even call an ambulance, of course." She didn't mean for him to hear. He did. But he said nothing. Because right now, he wasn't a man defending his pride. He was a father on the edge of losing his world. Inside Trauma Bay 3, doctors and nurses moved with practiced chaos. Tubes, scissors. Vitals shouted aloud. Someone cut open the quilt and froze for a second. The little girl, maybe 10, maybe 11, had a gash across her temple, and her pupils weren't reacting. "Severe TBI," the attending called out. "Possible brainstem involvement. Intubate now." Darius was pushed out, gently but firmly. He didn't resist, just stared at the swinging doors until they stopped moving, then sank into the nearest chair and pressed his fists to his mouth. Linda watched from a distance. She saw fathers like him every week. The ones who came in hard, loud, angry. The ones who made everything a confrontation. But this one didn't shout. He didn't pace. He just sat there like gravity had betrayed him. And that unnerved her more. She turned back to her chart, never once asking his name. The waiting room never got quieter. It just changed sounds, from blaring televisions to whispering families, from crying toddlers to vending machine groans. Darius sat in the corner, jacket dripping onto the tile. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of helplessness. No one came to update him. No one asked if he needed water, a blanket, a word. He was invisible. Until a security guard walked by and gave him a second glance that lingered a little too long. The message was clear. Don't cause trouble. He didn't. He just waited. After what felt like an hour, maybe 2, a short, stocky man in scrubs approached him. "Mr. Darius," he said quietly. "I'm Dr. Neiman. I'm the attending neurosurgeon. Your daughter, Amaya, right?" Darius stood up so fast the chair screeched. "Yes, Amaya. Please just tell me." Dr. Neiman raised a palm. "She's alive, but she's in critical condition." Darius's knees nearly gave out. "We've managed to stabilize her vitals. but she suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. We're not seeing activity in key areas. We'll be doing more tests in the next few hours, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Darius nodded slowly, fists clenched. "Can I see her?" Dr. Naiman hesitated, then motioned toward the ICU wing. They walked in silence. Amaya looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. Her curls were matted with dried blood. A tube ran from her mouth. Machines beeped and blinked, keeping time for a body that wasn't sure it wanted to stay. Darius stepped closer, one hand brushing hers. It was still warm. "Hey, Peanut," he whispered. "I'm right here." No movement, no flutter of eyes, no squeeze. Just silence. A nurse entered. Someone new. Not Linda. She adjusted the IV without a word, then glanced at Darius like she expected him to step back. He didn't. He wasn't going anywhere. Linda passed by the window then, saw him through the glass. Still with the hoodie. Still with the clenched jaw. Still not yelling. And for reasons she couldn't explain. That bothered her most of all. The next morning brought no clarity, only machines keeping her alive, only shadows under Darius's eyes. He hadn't slept, barely moved. The nurses changed shifts, new doctors reviewed scans, but the words stayed the same. No response, no improvement, no hope. Yet. Linda came in for the morning shift. She noticed Darius was still in the same hoodie, same chair, same silence. She handed off her bag to the charge nurse and glanced at the chart. "Still here?" she asked flatly. No one responded. Around noon, Darius finally stepped out for a coffee. He returned 5 minutes later to find a different nurse inside Amaya's room. Linda. She was adjusting the monitors, typing something into the system, not even looking at Amaya. "You touch her?" he asked. Linda looked up, slightly startled. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you touched her. I adjusted her IV." He stared at her. "With gloves?" Her face stiffened. "Of course." A tense pause. Then he nodded, walked past her, and sat beside the bed again. Linda didn't leave right away. Instead, she folded her arms and said, "Look, I know this is hard, but being rude to the staff isn't going to help." Darius turned to her slowly. "I didn't say anything rude." "You had an attitude." His voice was quiet. Too quiet. "You think because I asked if you wore gloves? I have an attitude." Linda blinked. "I'm just trying to make sure nothing makes her worse," he said, voice still level. "Because she's all I've got left." Linda didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. And for the first time she looked at him. Really looked, and saw not a stereotype, but a father holding on by threads. That night, Darius called his sister. It was the first call he'd made since the accident. "Still no change?" she asked, her voice a soft tremble through the phone. "Nothing. Do you want me to come?" He hesitated, then shook his head, even though she couldn't see. "I'm okay." She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. "Tell her I love her," she whispered. He ended the call without replying. Back in the ICU, Amaya remained still. A nurse came by to check her oxygen levels. Darius barely noticed. He was holding her hand, thumb brushing over the scar on her knuckle. She got it falling off a skateboard last summer, refused to cry, laughed actually. "I'm tough, Daddy," she'd said. "Just like you." He almost smiled, remembering it. Almost. Across the hallway, in pediatrics, another drama was unfolding. Room 408. A boy named Caleb was on oxygen, heart monitor ticking unevenly. Linda stood outside his room, scanning his chart. Her face was tight, unreadable. Inside, Caleb's mother, Jenna, paced in slow circles. She'd been crying. Not dramatically. Just that quiet, hopeless kind of crying that happened when you were too tired to wail. "Any update?" she asked when Linda stepped in. "We're transferring him to the transplant list," Linda said softly. "His heart functions declining faster than expected." Jenna clutched the bed rail. "But we're running out of time." "I know." Jenna looked up, eyes red. "How do you even ask the universe for someone else's child to die? So yours can live?" Linda didn't have an answer. But later that night, as she walked past ICU and caught sight of Amaya again, the question echoed harder. The hospital had its own kind of gravity. It pulled hours into minutes, stretched seconds into eternities. Darius had lost all sense of time. Nurses came and went. Daylight blinked in and out of the slats of the window. Coffee cups multiplied on the side table like ghosts of false hope. On the third morning, Dr. Naiman returned with another physician. Older, gray-haired, carrying a clipboard like a shield. They didn't sit. "Mr. Carter," the older one said, "I'm Dr. Harrow from neurology. We've completed Amaya's assessments." Darius braced. "She meets the clinical criteria for brain death." "I'm so sorry." The world tilted. Brain death. Not coma, not vegetative, not maybe. Gone. "But her heart's still beating," Darius said. "With mechanical support. The machines are keeping her body going, but she's no longer there." He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stood perfectly still, as if even breathing might break what was left. Dr. Naiman stepped forward. "We'll give you time. There's no rush. We can keep support going until you decide what you'd like to do." "What I'd like to do?" he thought. "I'd like to wake up." That evening, Linda returned for her shift. She glanced at Amaya's chart, then at Darius. Still there. Motionless. Hollow. She didn't say anything. But when she stepped into pediatrics later that hour and heard Jenna sobbing over Caleb's weakening pulse, something inside her split, and that question returned. The one that kept scratching the back of her heart. What if one child's ending could be another's beginning? The next day, Darius sat beside Amaya's bed without speaking. He'd stopped answering calls, even from family. His sister had left voicemails, gentle ones, firm ones, desperate ones. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. Dr. Naiman approached quietly, pulling a chair beside him. "We're here whenever you want to talk," he said gently. "About next steps." Darius didn't respond. Naiman waited, then added, "There is something you should know. It's optional. No pressure, but Amaya is a candidate for organ donation." That got Darius's attention. "She's brain dead," the doctor said softly, "but her organs are viable. We have protocols to ensure everything is handled with dignity, if it's something you'd want to consider." Darius blinked, slow. "You want her heart?" "Not me," Naiman said. "But there's a boy, Caleb, 7 years old. No other matches have come up. Time is tight." Darius looked down at Amaya's hand. That same little scar, the one he used to kiss before bedtime. "She loved giving things away," he said quietly. "Pencils, stickers, lunches." Naiman nodded, giving him space. "I need time," Darius said. Of course. In the hallway, Linda watched through the ICU glass wall. She'd overheard the name. Caleb. She walked back to pediatrics slowly, mind racing. Jenna was curled up beside her son, head resting next to his. Linda hesitated, then stepped in. "I think there may be a donor," she whispered. Jenna sat up so fast the chair squeaked. "Are you serious?" "Nothing's confirmed," Linda said quickly. "And it's sensitive. But maybe." Jenna started to cry. Linda held her, guilt already blooming behind her eyes. Because suddenly, Caleb's miracle meant Darius's hell had to become permanent. Darius sat alone in the hospital chapel. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. The kind of silence that made you hear your own heart beat. He wasn't a religious man. Never really had been. But something about this room, the stained glass, the wooden pews, the scent of old hymn books, felt like a place where pain could breathe. He didn't pray. He just stared at the candles someone else had lit, wondering how flame could flicker so steadily while his world collapsed. A volunteer entered, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes. She didn't say much, just offered him a cup of tea. He nodded, not because he wanted it, but because she asked with humanity in her voice. "You're the father from ICU, right?" she asked softly. He tensed. "Yeah." "I heard about your daughter." He nodded once. Then she said something no one else had. She must have been really loved. His throat clenched. Upstairs, Jenna clutched Caleb's chart as if willing it to change. The transplant coordinator had visited. Said nothing was guaranteed, but preparations had to be made, just in case. Linda stood nearby, trying not to watch the clock. When Darius eventually returned to ICU, he looked like someone who'd aged a decade in a day. Dr. Neiman met him at the door. "I spoke with the coordinator," Darius said, voice barely a whisper. "Let's do it." Neiman exhaled gently. "Are you sure?" "No," Darius said, "but it's what she'd want." He walked into Amaya's room one last time, took her hand, and whispered something no one else heard. Then signed the form, with fingers that shook, but a heart that didn't. The surgical team assembled just before dawn. The operating room was cold, bright, humming with low conversation and focused movements. Darius wasn't allowed in. He stood in the hallway outside, arms crossed, leaning against the wall as if it might hold him up through what was coming. Linda walked past, slowed, then stopped. They hadn't spoken since the attitude comment. Now she saw a man who looked like he'd given something more than consent. He'd given away a piece of his soul. I'm sorry," she said quietly. Darius didn't turn to her. For what? For assuming things. For not seeing. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, and then said something that stuck with her long after. Most people don't want to see grief. It messes up the picture they already painted. In OR6, Amaya's heart beat its last inside her body. It was lifted with care, with reverence. In OR2, down the hallway, Caleb lay prepped, his small chest opened, machines breathing for him. When the transplant team arrived, Jenna almost collapsed in relief and guilt all at once. She hadn't slept, hadn't changed clothes, just held on to her son's stuffed giraffe like it might absorb the burden. The surgery began. Hours passed. Then came the moment Linda would never forget. The flat monitor suddenly blinked, then beeped and beeped again. A rhythm, a heartbeat. Not Caleb's, not anymore. Amaya's. It rained the day they took Amaya off the ventilator. Not hard. Just that soft, steady kind of rain that feels more like a lullaby than a storm. Darius stayed until the very last moment. He held her hand, kissed her forehead, and whispered every story he could remember from the 11 years they'd shared. Then, as the machines were silenced one by one, he looked at the ceiling and whispered, "You're free now." The nurses cried. Even the surgeon stepped out for a moment. Linda didn't go into the room. She watched from the doorway, fingers pressed to her lips. That night when she went home, she didn't turn on the TV. She sat in the silence and cried. Caleb's recovery was slow, but miraculous. By day 3, his color returned. By day 5, he opened his eyes and said, "Mom?" Jenna nearly collapsed from joy. Linda visited once, under the guise of checking vitals. Caleb was sitting up, clutching his stuffed giraffe, nibbling crackers. "You're the nurse with the cool watch," he said. She smiled. "You remembered. I remember your voice." Her smile faded slightly. She glanced at the heart monitor, steady, strong, and for the first time fully understood what was beating inside that little boy. It wasn't just a heart. It was a goodbye and a beginning. The hospital eventually moved on, like it always does. New emergencies came. New patients filled the halls. New stories began and ended between the walls that had seen everything. But some stories left a shadow, and for Linda, this one lingered. She started noticing things differently. The quiet fathers, the scared mothers, the unspoken grief behind every request. She asked more questions, looked people in the eye longer, caught herself before assuming. It didn't fix everything, but it changed something. One afternoon, about 3 weeks later, Linda took a call from the front desk. "There's a man here," the receptionist said. "Says he doesn't want to talk to a doctor. Asked for you." Linda furrowed her brow. "Who?" "Didn't give a name. Said you'd know." Curious and cautious, she made her way to the main lobby. And there he was, Darius. Different, yet exactly the same. Jacket clean, posture straighter, but his eyes held the same quiet weight. He handed her a small envelope. "No return address," he said. "I didn't sign it either. I wanted you to have it." Linda took it slowly. "Why?" He met her gaze for the first time since the OR hallway. "Because you were the only one who saw both sides." Then he turned and walked out into the afternoon sun. Linda stood frozen for a long time before opening the envelope. Inside was a photo. Amaya, smiling wide, a gap-toothed grin, wearing a princess dress, hands covered in glitter and paint. And behind the photo, a note, just 5 words. "She liked your watch too." Weeks turned into months. Caleb returned home. He wasn't the same boy. He tired easily, moved slower, and asked strange questions about dreams he couldn't explain. But his heart was strong. Jenna never forgot. She kept a photo of Amaya on the mantel next to Caleb's get-well cards. Whenever guests asked, she told the story, not with drama, but with reverence. She saved him, she'd say, even though she never met him. One evening, Jenna took Caleb to the hospital for a checkup. Linda greeted them at the door. Caleb ran up and hugged her waist. "Still wearing the watch," he said with a grin. She smiled. still ticking. Dr. Naaman came down to meet them. After the appointment, as they were leaving, Jenna hesitated, then turned to Linda. Would it be inappropriate if we ever reached out to Amaya's family? Linda paused. I'm not sure. He's private, but I think he'd appreciate knowing how well Caleb is doing. Jenna nodded. We'll write something. You can pass it along if it feels right. Meanwhile, in a quieter part of the city, Darius had returned to work. Not because he was ready, because bills didn't care about grief. He moved slower now, talked less, smiled almost never, but one thing had changed. He started volunteering twice a week at a grief support group. He didn't talk much, but when new parents came in, hollow-eyed and numb, he always offered the seat beside him, and sometimes that was enough to remind someone they weren't alone in the ache. One crisp Saturday morning, Linda drove across town. She wasn't working. She had the day off, but something pulled her out of bed early, something that felt unfinished. In her passenger seat sat a small envelope. Inside, a folded letter from Jenna and Caleb. She parked outside a modest community center, the kind with faded banners and kids playing soccer on a cracked field nearby. She walked in, unsure of what she'd find. Inside, the receptionist greeted her kindly. Grief groups in room 4, she said, not even asking who Linda was, as if grief had a familiar face. Linda stepped into the room quietly, chairs in a circle, coffee pot in the corner, the hum of low, tired conversation, and there he was. Darius, sitting 2 seats from the edge, listening as a mother spoke about her son who died from leukemia. His posture was the same, solid, present, quiet. He didn't see her until the group ended. People stood, stretched, hugged. Linda approached slowly. He looked up, didn't smile, but didn't frown either. I brought something, she said. He gestured to the hallway. They stepped outside. Linda handed him the envelope. He didn't open it immediately, just held it, staring at the name written in soft, curved handwriting. Mr. Carter. Then he said, voice gravel low, thank you, and tucked it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. The same place Amaya once slept against after falling asleep in the car. That night, Darius finally opened the envelope. He waited until the house was silent. No TV, no fridge humming, no traffic outside, just the sound of him breathing, and barely that. The letter was handwritten, not long, not dramatic, just honest. Dear Mr. Carter, you don't know us, but your daughter saved my son. His name is Caleb. He's 7. He has a laugh that sounds like a squeaky toy and a brain full of dinosaur facts. He's alive today because of Amaya. There's nothing I can say that would ever be enough. But I wanted you to know her name is spoken in our house every day with love, with gratitude, with reverence. You gave us more than time. You gave us a second chance to be a family. We will honor that gift forever. If you ever want to meet us, we'd be honored. But if not, please know you are in our hearts. Always. With endless thanks. Jenna and Caleb. Darius read it twice, then again, then held it to his chest. Not like a paper, like a person. At the same time, across town, Caleb was falling asleep. Jenna tucked him in. Did Amaya like dinosaurs too? He asked sleepily. Jenna smiled. I don't know, baby. Caleb yawned. I think she does now. And with that, he drifted off. Heartbeat steady. Dreams shared. A few weeks later, a letter arrived for Jenna. No return address. Handwritten. Careful. Inside was a card. Not store-bought, made by hand. Watercolor edges, the kind of thing a child might have made in art class. On the front, one word. Thanks. Inside it read, "You were right, she saved him. But she saved me too." Darius. Jenna pressed the card to her heart, then showed it to Caleb. He read it silently, then whispered, "Can we write back?" "Of course." A few months later, they met. Neutral ground, the hospital courtyard. Trees blooming, sky soft with spring. Jenna brought a picnic. Caleb wore his favorite dinosaur t-shirt. Darius arrived with a bouquet, not for Jenna, but for Amaya. He placed it on the stone bench beneath the memorial plaque. They sat, talked, not about loss, but about life. About what Caleb was reading, about what Amaya had loved, about how grief doesn't shrink, but love grows bigger around it. Linda passed by on break. She didn't interrupt, just watched from a distance as 3 lives stitched themselves together with threads made of memory and mercy. And for once, the hospital didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. A year passed. Caleb grew taller. He joined a soccer team, lost his 2 front teeth, started asking questions about the stars. Sometimes Jenna would catch him staring out the window, hand on his chest. "What are you thinking about?" she'd ask. He'd shrug. "Just listening." And she never pried. Because maybe, just maybe, he was hearing something only he could. Darius visited the hospital less. But he never stopped visiting the bench. Every month, without fail, he brought flowers. Sometimes he talked to the plaque. Sometimes he sat in silence. Sometimes he smiled, remembering how Amaya used to spin in circles until she fell down laughing. Linda saw him once. She almost approached, but then saw him close his eyes, head tilted up, face relaxed. And she knew. He didn't need a conversation. He just needed a moment. At a school assembly, Caleb's class was asked to write about someone who inspired them. Other kids wrote about superheroes, firefighters, famous singers. Caleb wrote about a girl he never met. She was brave, he wrote, and kind. And even when she was gone, she still helped people. He handed in the paper without fanfare, but his teacher cried when she read it, and that week the principal made a special announcement about Amaya Carter, and how a little girl with a big heart was still saving lives. Even now, time did what it always does. It softened the edges, blurred the sharpest days, but some moments stayed carved in memory. For Linda, it was the night Amaya's heart first beat inside Caleb. For Jenna, it was the letter from a stranger who gave her family back. For Darius, it was a Wednesday morning, nearly 2 years later, when he walked past a playground and heard a laugh, high, clear, familiar. He stopped in his tracks, turned, and there was Caleb, chasing a soccer ball, laughing so hard he doubled over, hand on his chest. Jenna stood nearby, waving to him. He waved back, unsure why he was suddenly crying. Then Caleb looked up, saw him, and without hesitation, ran over. "You're Amaya's dad, right?" he asked. Darius blinked. "Yes." Caleb beamed. "I'm trying to be brave like her." Darius knelt, eyes glossy. "You already are." They didn't talk long, just a few minutes. But as Caleb ran back to play, Darius stood rooted, the weight in his chest not pain, but something else. Something like peace. Because even though grief stayed, so did love. And that love, planted in the darkest soil, was still growing. Years passed. The bench beneath the plaque weathered with time, but the flowers never stopped appearing. Sometimes roses, sometimes wildflowers. Once, a tiny bouquet of sunflowers tied with a shoelace. Linda still worked at the hospital. She trained new nurses now, and with every new batch, she told them the same thing. Assume nothing. Everyone's carrying something invisible. Look deeper. She never mentioned names, but her eyes always found their way to the ICU wing when she said it. Jenna wrote a children's book, not about Caleb, not exactly. It was about a little girl with stars in her pockets who gave away pieces of them to light up other children's skies. The book was dedicated to AC. Caleb illustrated the cover. Darius grew older. He started a scholarship fund in Amaya's name for girls who loved science and skateboards and laughter. He didn't tell many people, just set it up quietly, funded it monthly, and smiled when applications came in from kids who reminded him of her. One day, he received a letter from a girl in Chicago. She'd gotten the scholarship, wanted to say thanks, said she wanted to be a doctor. She ended her letter with, "My dad says I ask too many questions, but I tell him I'm just curious, like Amaya must have been." Darius folded the letter, placed it beside the others he kept in the same wooden box, next to the photo, next to the hospital bracelet, next to the watch Amaya had once stolen from his drawer and called her superpower. He wound it once a year, just to hear it tick. Caleb turned 18 on a quiet Sunday. Jenna made waffles. He made coffee. They sat on the porch and talked about college, travel, and things that scared them. Then Caleb grew quiet. "I think I want to meet him again," he said. Jenna nodded. They didn't need to ask who. A week later, Darius opened his front door to find a young man standing there, tall and familiar. Caleb. They hadn't seen each other in years. Caleb held out a small box. Inside, a locket. Clear glass, heart-shaped. Inside, a tiny watch gear, no bigger than a freckle. "I made it in shop class," Caleb said. "It doesn't tick, but I figured it doesn't need to." Darius smiled. Not the half smile he'd worn for years. A full one, the kind that reaches the eyes. They talked for hours. About music, about loss, about life after. At one point, Caleb asked, "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" Darius didn't hesitate. "She already is." And as evening fell, and shadows stretched across the lawn, two men, bonded by something deeper than blood, sat in silence. Not because they had nothing left to say, but because sometimes the quiet holds more than words ever could. Some stories don't end, they echo. In hospital hallways, in handwritten letters, in the space between two heartbeats. Amaya Carter never grew up, but she became a part of something that did. A boy named Caleb, a nurse named Linda, a grieving father who found purpose in the ashes. And through them, her light never dimmed. It changed shape, changed names, changed lives. So if you ever wonder what legacy looks like, it might not be in statues or headlines. It might be in a laugh on a playground, a tiny gear in a locket, a story told softly to a child falling asleep. Because love doesn't die. It just finds new ways to be remembered.